Hello and welcome to the CRM Zen show where we talk about all things Zoho. This is episode 161, Sandbox Galore, recorded on Friday, August 27th, 2021 from Zenata Consulting. I'm Tyler Colt.
And I'm Jordan Benson, and let's get right on into the show.
So let's do it. So as always, we're going to start off with our announcements and events. We do have an upcoming webinar, as we always do. That's going to be on Zoho PageSense coming up here pretty quickly. It'll be September 21st. Should be a Tuesday, bright and early at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And as always, over at zenata.com/events, you can scroll through and see, all the events going on in the world of Zoho, whether that's hosted by us, by Zoho, or by other partners. We know sometimes Zoho sneaks in these events with not a ton of notice, so we try to give it one easy place to just find all of those. So if you are hungry for a webinar, check out ours or check out any of those over at zenata.com/events. And with that, let's go ahead and jump on into the news. Pretty full week here. So first story, kind of just a roll up here. Zoho Projects turns 15 years old. 10 more years, it'll be able to rent a car. Definitely an application that we use a lot at Zenata and implement a lot for clients. As we mentioned to a lot of people, project management software is really just about preference, about finding one that matches your process. But Zoho Projects has definitely come a long way.
Yeah, I definitely say I've used in the last 2 years more heavily than I've used any other project management tool. And I've used kind of them all, from the basics of a Trello board to, those big hefty boys that kind of match projects on a parity level. And Projects is a lot easier to use than I'd say most of the ones I've used in my lifetime.
Especially if you're thinking in templates. That's always what we advise with people here is Projects is really good as long as the things you're doing are relatively templatable. If you need something kind of flexible or off the cuff, it might not be the easiest to work with in that way, but definitely come a long way. And with that most recent update to their new UI, it's definitely even better. Next story here, we do have a story from Zoho Desk. They've added ticket archiving. So nothing too crazy here. Basically just a way to set up a rule saying, hey, if a ticket has been closed or inactive for a certain period of time, let's just go ahead and move it over to an archive list where it'll be held indefinitely. I would see kind of the use case of this is that, if you were to look at your view of closed tickets, it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger as time goes on. So if you're ever looking to do any reviews or find a particular ticket that's been closed, that list grows indefinitely. So might be some value here for kind of moving things over into an archived list.
Yeah, one's actually kind of a silent hero. I was looking at it from like an optimization perspective, and they talk about it a bit in this article. And the really cool thing here is that, in your first year, you're fine. But after you hit 5 years, 10 years, when your database grows, your load times are starting to get affected. And so they actually are storing this in a separate location so that it won't affect load times for your active stuff that you're working on, which is really cool because they're really thinking long-term optimization, because I'm sure that becomes a problem once you have an organization that's running a support desk for a long period of time. So it's one of those things that you won't necessarily appreciate because you're not using it actively, but it's just happening in the background and making your life easier without you even knowing it, which is pretty cool.
Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't even think about that when it comes to performance, having to load all of those tickets behind the scene every time that you pull up certain views. Definitely an efficiency benefit there. Another quick little update here over in Zoho CRM. You could always create a sandbox over there, but you could only create one. And you'd basically set up a sandbox and, permission it to certain developers or testers to be able to interact with that system. They've kind of expanded that functionality now where they're going to allow people to first create multiple sandbox environments. This I could see a ton of use case for. Oftentimes you'll have, maybe a team is working on an API integration with some basic data. Another team is building some new workflows, right? And you don't really want those wires to cross. So you're able to basically spin off different sandbox environments with different users and profiles directly from here. The last little thing too is that you're now able to pull in your CRM account data into the sandbox. You're not having to just populate it with dummy data if you did want to test on some real records.
Yeah, some interesting things on this one are that they allow you to take the settings area and restrict which sandboxes have access to which settings. So if like someone's not working on workflow rules, they're supposed to be doing API development, you can just take away that section of the settings. Key to note that just because you disable that part of the settings, it doesn't like turn off that part of the account. So if you don't give someone access to mess with workflow rules, in the Sandbox, they still have the workflow rules running, so it won't affect the way the actual account runs. But what they haven't addressed, and what my big concern here is conflicts across those two. So if you have two people working on the same thing in different ways, how do you deploy it across two different ones? Or do you just have to choose one of them and go with it? Do you have any way to merge the different branches? Something that comes up a lot in development, and this is what they're kind of going for, is development streams. And they have to have some way to merge conflict resolution. Otherwise, you're just going to have to really restrict your different sandboxes to be in certain lanes and not give them certain features.
Yeah. So if some of them were going to work on deals, you might want to turn off everything that isn't deals, and a different sandbox might need to have no access to deals to make sure you're not deploying two different.
Just to stop people from stepping on each other's toes. You might want to be very, very deliberate about how you implement them and not just throw out 3 full versions of a sandbox.
Yeah.
But that's, to be seen.
Nonetheless, though, I think there's definitely some value there. I mean, even just being able to take, if you were thinking about 2 different ways of restructuring your deal flow, building out 2 different sandboxes and kind of giving the team some visibility into 2 options, as an example, could definitely be a pretty nice way to roll out new features for the CRM.
Definitely.
So he's moving on here. A couple things, a couple more news stories. One over from Bigin, the darling app of 2020 that seems like it gets very little news nowadays. So in the CRM, we've always been able to associate contacts using contact roles. But in this case, they've kind of created a new standard field for Bigin that is kind of like a multi-select here for secondary contacts. So this is a little bit different than how the contact roles list works in the CRM, where it's kind of like a defined list, and each of those has a particular parameter to identify their role. This is kind of like a simpler way. It's just a multi-select field, where one field you can just grab a handful of contacts and make that association. You've got that primary contact, and then you've got a whole list of secondary contacts that you're able to pull from as well. I'd imagine this is probably something they're looking at in the CRM. Sometimes I always wonder, the Bigin's kind of the testing ground for some of these use cases before they go over to the CRM. I will highlight as well, you could always do this in the standard CRM now, just using a multi-lookup field. It just wouldn't give you this visibility like it does here to show these as secondary contacts. And so moving on here, one little story, and one that we've actually been waiting for a long time, ever inching closer to Zoho Bookings being something we recommend. Zoho Bookings now has a direct integration with Zoom. So this was previously available, but only through Zapier, where they kind of had a pre-built Zapier flow that you could use to add a Zoho meeting or a Zoom link to a bookings meeting after the fact. The big advantage of this direct integration is that it's generating them at the same point that the appointment is booked. So you're not making an edit to an existing meeting, 5 seconds later. You're actually creating that meeting right out of the gate with that Zoom link. Definitely a really, really nice one, especially as Zoho Meetings still has a couple of little drawbacks that force us not to use it quite yet.
Yeah, I'm super, super excited about this one. I think that booking still isn't quite to where we need it to be, but this is a huge step in the right direction. It's one of the big, like when we have a talking point about why we don't recommend it, not integrating with Zoom is just like one of the key talking points, because it's a very commonly used platform, and you can't expect an organization to drop Zoom for another meeting tool that's not quite as proficient as Zoom is at doing what it does. And so having the ability to integrate one of the most popular apps, especially through the pandemic, is pretty huge.
Yeah. Seems like it'll be a pretty quick and painless integration. You'll probably just go ahead and access the settings, click on Zoom. It's going to do that standard pop-up. You're going to log in and then be good to go. Last little thing they need to figure out in bookings is how to sync better with calendars. There is still that underlying issue that, at best, the sync into like something like Google Calendar happens daily, and if then can be a little unreliable. So a couple rough edges there with Zoho Bookings, but definitely getting better and better as time goes on. Now a couple updates here from a product we don't talk about too often. This one is Zoho Voice. This is their roll-up post here for August. So a handful of things here that we'll touch on quickly. They now have holiday configuration, so you can set up business hours as well as holidays. So you can, of course, specify from a default list of holidays as well as create your own. And then these are going to have specific rules around call routing and kind of what happens if a call comes in on one of those days. You're now able to transfer a call to a queue. So previously they did have call transfers, but they had to go directly to like what you would call a warm transfer, where you're going directly to that person. Now you can actually transfer into someone else's queue so that once they finish their current call, it'll connect them to that person. Lastly here, just a quick one. Callers now get a little feedback rating if you so choose to turn it on, where they're able to, basically give some feedback about the support they received or the answers that they got through that call. Overall, a lot of powerful stuff here with Zoho Voice. It seems like one of those tools that is going to be super useful over time. I still gives me a little pause with the pricing that they have on Zoho Voice. The fact that it's more expensive than RingCentral is kind of a tough pill to swallow compared to like a market leader. But some of these queuing tools are really, really nice to have.
Yeah, and just like the big changes here, these are huge, all coming at once. Gives me a lot of hope and positivity around it. It seems like they're really pushing on this one, and I expect big things to come. It's not going to be something that's going to be on the back burner, like some of the apps have to sit because there's so many apps in Zoho. And while paying a little bit more than something like RingCentral is a tough pill to swallow, if it gets to the point where it's a top line app where it can go head to head with them, to me, it's a no-brainer to pay the extra cost to have it directly inside of Zoho, because at the end of the day, the biggest downside with RingCentral is that the integrations with VoIP are never perfect. They're always so hard to implement. So if it's something that's in-house, it's just going to make your life so much easier day to day. And so that's a huge win.
Yeah, and I think that they kind of see it as a full call center tool, not just like a basic voice over IP, which probably justifies some of that cost. I think just they're going to need to do something there, or at least maybe give more minutes with your subscription fee. You're not really actually getting a lot of inbound and outbound minutes. Maybe if they were to wipe that into like unlimited and keep their current price, I think there's a little tinkering to do there, but nonetheless, like the product itself is pretty solid. And I know that they're pretty committed to making this thing really hum. A couple more stories here. Zoho, or the Zoho CRM mobile app, is now HIPAA compliant. I think we may have seen this last week as well. So this might be a repeat that they've kind of snuck in. This applies both to Android as well as iOS. Basically gives you the ability to default encrypt all the various data, as well as respect some of those specific HIPAA compliant fields that you're able to add to the CRM now. I will say, if you are going to do this encryption, do it like at the end of a workday. It might take a little bit of time for this to run through and actually encrypt all of that data. So just something to be aware of if you do go ahead and turn this off. But huge selling point for the CRM here to just be fully HIPAA compliant, even to a mobile level.
Yeah, and even like anyone who's using the mobile apps religiously, I know there's not that many of them compared to desktop users, but it's almost just worth turning it on, regardless of whether or not you're in the healthcare industry or anything that needs HIPAA or GDPR, just because why not encrypt your data if they're giving you the option without an additional cost?
Very true.
It's your company's lifeblood, all of this data that you have stored through your CRM. It's your customers. It's everything. So encrypting it, if you're using the mobile apps, just makes sense, especially if you're connecting to a lot of on-the-go networks that aren't your private Wi-Fi networks.
Very true. Very true. A couple other little updates here. Zoho CRM added some new charts for Webform analytics. So this is an interesting one. We don't really use the CRM web forms too often. We generally end up using things like Zoho Forms because you can have some on-form logic, show this field if another one has a certain value, make this required based on some other conditions. But the CRM web forms are definitely there, and they're definitely functional. So if you are just a CRM user and you don't want to pay for another application to add some forms to your website that tie into Zoho, you can definitely use these web forms. And really here, they've kind of just built out some additional analytics for tracking things like time spent on fields, field correction, so people having to make edits to fields after the fact, what field someone gets to where they're going to drop off. As you'd expect, something like payment information is going to have a high drop off, especially compared to just like first name. So a whole bunch of different charts here around the web forms. Definitely nice to have because this data is kind of hard to access after the fact. Like this isn't something you can really write to the CRM into like a lead record, right? It has to be captured by the web form. So really cool to see them build this out. And I'd love it if this came to Zoho Forms as well.
Yeah, I'm really hoping it comes to Zoho Forms, but it's definitely a huge improvement. It's almost tantalizing. It makes me want to use the feature more. just because the field correction one in particular, I think of so many forms that I fill out on a website, and I type in my phone number, submit the form, and I had to try like 3 different times because they want the phone number has to be formatted in a very specific way. They don't tell you the way that they expect it to be, so you just have to guess. And then eventually submit the form. It's like, I'm just trying to give you my information. Like, it shouldn't be this hard.
Or something like field drop off. You might find that so many people are dropping off when you ask for payment information that maybe you should just ask for that later. Right.
Yeah,
and
get them
into
free
the
trial and get them in, and
get them into the CRM first, and then, figure out payment later. So definitely some value here for these. And if you're listening, Zoho Forms team, please copy paste this into Forms. I would love that. Last little news story here before we move forward is going to be around Zoho projects. This one is very niche. So this is basically looking at action cards inside of the Zoho projects bot for Microsoft Teams. So really what an action card is it's like a pre-designed way to look at a particular task when you receive a notification about it. So this would be something like, I'm inside of projects. I want to update people about a certain task or get an update about a task. I can send them a card. And if you're watching us on YouTube here, you'll see it basically gives you a breakdown. What is the task name? What project is it a part of? What's the due date? Right. And then someone can just directly comment back or mark that as complete, all within Zoho Teams. So if you are a Teams user as well as projects, could be a nice one to try out.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one for Microsoft users. I know like we do something similar in Cliq where we like to kind of design our cards. And, so if you're a diehard Microsoft user like I am with Google, could be some value there, I guess.
Got it. And with that, that should wrap up our news, and we'll go ahead and move forward to our implementation of the week. Normally that's where Brett would say, what do you have for us this week, Tyler? But I guess I'll just lead into it myself. So this one is a analytics build out, pulling in some Zoho inventory data. So this build out basically allows us to calculate accounting and physical stock metrics via Zoho Analytics. I think about 6 months to a year ago, we did an implementation similar to this around counting or calculating your accounting stock. And at that time, Zoho Inventory's connector for analytics didn't actually provide the data necessary to calculate physical stock. They kind of built that in later. So we thought we'd revisit this. There's basically a method here where you pull in all of this various data into Zoho Analytics, and then you can use some SQL tables to basically recreate the calculations that Zoho Inventory is running. So they're looking at invoices and bills for your accounting stock and shipments and receives for your physical stock. So it takes a little bit of massaging, I will say, but at the end of the day, you're able to basically create tables that roll up all those various items and calculate things like stock on hand, committed stock, and available for sale. So you're actually able to know, what I need to purchase at a more macro level. The main reason that you'd want to do this is that in inventory, the ability to actually see these in mass in like a big table with all of your items and these values is very limited. And the main place that you're able to find things like available for sale and committed stock is actually in each of the specific items, which makes it a lot less useful, right? You might want to pull a report and say, based on vendor, show me every item that's below a certain stock. And you really just can't do that with the default reporting in analytics or inside of inventory. So definitely a nice one to have, from that data, you can roll it up into tables, drop it into KPIs, really present this however you need once you have it calculated over in analytics.
Just when you thought that Zanata only knew Zoho, turns out Tyler's also an accounting wizard and can solve all your accounting needs.
Allegedly. Yeah, we figured out as we go. Taken, I think, one accounting class back in college, but I've definitely learned a lot since then. Nice one to have, though. Definitely one that's kind of a niche usage if you are a power user for inventory, but could add some value if that is the case. And that'll take us right here into this week's read. This is an interesting one here from over at Diginomica. Basically, a couple different B2B SaaS providers have now announced streaming services. So if you didn't get enough yet with Disney Plus and Hulu Plus and Paramount Plus and all these various streaming services, we've got some more for you. So Salesforce, of course, has to do this. So they've released Salesforce Plus. basically what this is they've brought in 50 editors, writers, directors and content creators to create things like, these seem a lot like podcasts. These are really going to be things like Salesforce CMO talking to marketing people, right? Career advice and professional growth from people who have kind of done it already. Career trajectories of CEOs where they've kind of pulled some of their knowledge from. I would assume it's going to be multimedia, but a lot of this sounds very podcasty to me. So I would assume podcasts or video podcasts on this platform. Same thing here. Demandbase has also rolled out their own very similar type of content here. And Terminus has rolled out Terminus TV. I'm actually not familiar with Terminus. I think they're like a marketing platform of some kind. There's so many of these nowadays, it's hard to keep track. Definitely interesting, for like a SaaS provider to actually launch a service. I guess that's what's interesting to me is if Salesforce was going to create a podcast and their CMO is going to be interviewing all these people, you would think you'd want to put that out on Spotify, Libsyn, the places where people normally go to get their podcasts, a little confusing to me to create this content on an exclusive platform.
And this just in, on Zenata Plus, you'll be able to see the Zen show in a higher resolution.
Yep. We're going to move everything behind a paywall, right? That's where we want our podcast. Definitely interesting. One to keep an eye on. I'd be interested to see if more companies do this. I doubt Zoho would. I don't think this is really in their wheelhouse. But that'll be interesting to track is, can a company like Salesforce really be a market maker and attract people to their own streaming platform? It just seems like the reason you're doing this podcast is to increase the amount of eyes onto people, onto Salesforce. So, it'll be interesting to see. Now over on Zenata.com, we have one blog here, Improve Your Team with Zoho Learn. This is an application that launched pretty recently here, so it is new for Zoho, but it's very, very good. So Zoho Learn is an LMS or learning management system. There you're able to create manuals, courses, quizzes, kind of a whole multimedia learning platform that you're able to go through. We've actually been diving into this internally to build out some internal things around certifications and trainings. And this article basically just gives you a walkthrough of the basics of what you'll need to know to start building those out yourself. Nothing really crazy here, just kind of an overview of what means what, what's a space inside of Zoho Learn so that you can hit the ground running. Another here, we did post a new case study. This is for a company called Able Fire Equipment. They supply rental equipment for staffing vehicles, basically for emergency or disaster response. This was an interesting one because it was very, very heavy in Zoho Creator, building everything from, part-time employee check-in and timekeeping to overtime calculations based on California labor law. I mean, really, this thing has touched so many different parts of their business, all just built into this one custom creator application. So a good one to read through, might spark some joy around things that can be automated or improved using Creator. And of course, here we have our pick of the week. This one here, as our new trend to pick things that don't just pertain to Zoho. There's a tool called the Great Suspender. This is really just a pretty simple extension that you could plug into Chrome or any browser built on top of Chrome, so something like Brave. Really, all this is doing is it's looking at your tabs, it's looking at ones that are inactive, and it's suspending them. So if you are the type that likes to save a whole bunch of tabs open on your current browser, you're going to want to install this. It's going to speed up the load time on any tabs that you're actually using by reducing the bandwidth on refreshing and maintaining these inactive tabs that are kind of just sitting there.
And I think of a few viewers who might be able to get use out of that just based on every time I do a screen share with a client and they throw up their 40 plus Chrome tabs that are going on to find the spreadsheet they're looking to show me.
Yep. Definitely a good one to have. One little thing that is nice about this, you're actually able to whitelist specific domains or URLs. If you know, like, hey, I never want to suspend CRM. I'm going to flip back to that one all the time. So just keep it active for me. You're also able to do that for those commonly used tabs. And now here, a quick little one on our tip of the week. So this is a video on creating reports inside of Zoho Analytics. So last week we had our video on how to understand the data and kind of understand the linking records between different data tables. So for those of you who skipped that one because it sounded really boring, this one's going to be a little bit more interesting here, creating reports like pivot tables, formula columns, chart views, all the various things that you actually use to roll up your data into something more useful. About an 8-minute video. And then next week, spoiler alert, we'll be going through how to create dashboards inside of Zoho Analytics as well, kind of doing the whole, taking these reports and actually formatting them into a page that you'll want to check out on a daily basis. And with that, I think that is going to be a wrap. So as always, if you have any questions or comments, please head over to zenata.com and drop us a line. On the website, of course, is where you'll find complete episodes as well as show notes with links to the stories we discussed today. So as you can follow us on your favorite social media platform and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, as well as on YouTube. And of course, before we wrap today, thank you, Jordan, for stepping in. I know Brett's out of town, so we called on you to rise to the occasion and jump in on the CRM Zen show. So it was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks everyone who joined us today, and have a great weekend, everyone who is watching this over that.
Perfect. We will see you next Monday.